everybody, my name's Amelia and welcome back to the channel. So I have put this video off for some time now, and honestly, trying to get comfortable here. Honestly, the main reason is just because it's kind of a big deep dive type of video, and whenever I do deep dives, it takes me a while to both outline them, film them, and edit them. But I thought that this would be something fun to do. Let's go ahead and just jump into the topic. So I want to talk about consciousness. And the reason I want to talk about consciousness is simply from my channeling sessions, which if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can look at my spiritual awakening video. But I also want to talk about it because I've been, I don't want to say hardcore studying it, but like in my free time, I just keep listening to philosophers, physicists, and people in spaces that talk about consciousness quite a bit. And I am now, really pondering it and kind of rethinking our reality. So anyway, I wanted to have this conversation and I kind of wanted to do a deep dive. Now, I do want to say it's not going to be as rambly or ranty as my usual videos. And I also want to point out that this particular video, it's going to have some really complex themes and concepts that I will try my best to put into layman's terms and I will try my best to explain. I am still a student of this, so I may not be 100% in understanding, but I will quote a lot of people to try to make sure that the concept comes across clearly. I also want to note that not everybody is going to believe in this or appreciate it or care about it. If you are already a person who has very strong spiritual beliefs, you know what you stand for, you know what you believe, this can be kind of hard for you. And I say that because I was one of those people that had very firm beliefs, and well, long story short, I had my spiritual awakening, and I say it that way. It's a weird word to frame it as, but my entire life and perspective of reality shifted. It changed. And yeah, I don't believe the same things I used to, and I used to be very firm in my beliefs, and now I feel more like a child relearning everything. And I personally am much more open than I used to be. And so if you have very rigid beliefs, this could kind of rock your world a little bit. So keep that in mind. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to talk about is this concept of everything is thought or everything is consciousness. What do I mean by this? Well, essentially what I mean by this is that consciousness is the overlaying filter of reality, or it's sort of what creates reality. Consciousness is God. It is in everything. It's in every living being. And we all share this collective consciousness, which we can just consider as pure consciousness, okay? Pure thought. That's all it is. And while we each have our own individual thoughts and individual consciousnesses, there is a deeper underlying thing that kind of connects everybody. Now, this idea that there is a oneness that connects all of us is not new. It's a super ancient concept, and it's something that a lot of people do sort of believe. But what I really want to point out is this idea that if everything is thought, it means we can manipulate our reality, and reality isn't really here. It is and it's not. It's more of like a dream. Now, why do I say this? I say this mostly from personal experience. During my second ever channeling experience, which I have not recorded because I didn't start recording them until much, much later, I ended up channeling this message that everything is thought. Everything that you perceive isn't really real, at least not in the way we think of it as. And because reality is sort of like this dream state, you can manipulate reality. You can impact and change reality through manifestation, through your words, through your own thoughts. You shape your perception of reality. Okay, so from that, if everything is thought, and what does that really mean? What does that really look like? Well, essentially, you can think of it like how you do a dream. And I know I keep saying this word dream, but that's honestly the easiest way to understand it. So when you go to sleep and you dream that you are kayaking in Costa Rica. Look, I did that once. Awesome. So fun. But let's say you're kayaking in Costa Rica in your dream, okay? You're not really doing that. You are asleep. But you, in your mind, as you perceive your dream, if you don't realize that you're dreaming, you think you're kayaking in Costa Rica, and it feels very real. You might feel the water. You might talk to people, have conversations, feel sensations, have different thoughts about your environment. Maybe you get frightened at some point. Maybe You end up getting so elated at some point during this dream. But technically, none of those things are really happening. Your body, your physical body, is wherever your house is. And it's likely not in Costa Rica, unless you are from Costa Rica. In that case, what's up? You live in a beautiful place, I just have to say. But if you don't live in Costa Rica, and you're dreaming about living in Costa Rica, then your physical body isn't actually there. We can think of reality in much the same vein. So, in a sense, this physical reality is the dream, and we are non-localized here. We exist out there, somewhere in this like quantum realm. We exist in this other plane of existence as an eternal soul or an eternal spirit. And when we come here, we experience life and we experience its limitations. Now, I want to dive into this concept of consciousness as a fundamental thing, and I want to talk about some big name philosophers that are out there that I've been looking into and that have inspired me. So I want to go ahead and first discuss this idea that consciousness is fundamental. What does it mean if consciousness is fundamental? It means that there can be no existence without it. There can be no reality without consciousness. Consciousness, in a way, manifests reality. Now, I mentioned this in a very short video about Plotinus and Platonic philosophy over on my Instagram, and I will post some of these short videos here on YouTube as well. But in that video, there is this discussion that Plotinus, this philosopher from ancient Greece, believed that people are all emanated from the one. So there is this one, and it makes an emanation, which makes an emanation, which is us, and then that emanation ends up creating reality. So us, as an emanation of consciousness, or the one, end up creating reality. Now, I've also heard that in channeled messages as well, that we are constantly creating and co-creating our reality together, and it's all based on our perceptions, our feelings, and our understandings. There's a lot to go into on that, but I want to try to stick closer to this idea of consciousness and less on the true nature of reality. But I do think that I would love to start making a series about just all of these strange philosophical things that have been sort of revelations for me, but are not new concepts by any means. These are as ancient as the Vedas in India, or even older possibly. But these concepts are not new, they're just new to me. If consciousness is fundamental, that means that like I said, there can be no reality without consciousness. And so consciousness must be the starting point. It must be the original thing that existed, and then perhaps in a desire to understand itself or to perceive itself, it split into a duality. And that duality split into a multiplicity, which eventually created us and each individualized soul. And the whole idea is to have an experience. That consciousness only wants to have an experience. And perhaps a philosophical way to look at this is with the concept I am. Now, consciousness cannot say I am anything if it cannot see itself. So if you have this pure consciousness that just exists, and that's all it is everything and nothing all at once. And in order to be anything, it would have to look at itself. Then it can say, I am this. Otherwise, it is just, I am. I am that I am. And there is nothing more. But even to say I am, you might have to perceive yourself in order to do that. Super deep philosophical idea here, but it does kind of point to this idea that in order for reality to exist, you have to have consciousness first, or God, as some people consider it, or this universal oneness. Now, another idea is about this know thyself. Now, know thyself is an ancient concept as well, and perhaps the reason everyone strives to know themselves, or the reason that we are advised from philosophers to know thyself, is because consciousness naturally has a desire to do so. So, and now I want to dive into a few philosophers and physicists on this particular topic before I dive into other sort of concepts about our reality. And I will try to leave timestamps down in the description box below, just covering some of these different chapters, I guess, in this video. I am moving very quickly, and I am only covering the basis of everything in this topic. I don't know if I would ever be able to cover the whole topic at large, there is so much research, so much work, and so much discussion on this. But again, I wanted to have a starting point, and I was overwhelming myself when I was making the outline. So I decided, let's just go simple. Let's just talk about quick points, and then we can elaborate if you guys are interested in that. And I do think that I just needed to get the basis out there, so that way I wouldn't overwhelm myself as I start deep diving even more. So first up, I want to talk about David Chalmers. Now, I'm going to be honest. David Chalmers, his ideas, I don't necessarily totally understand. He is much smarter than I. And I will also say that there are some ideas that I do understand, but I'm not quite sure I agree with, particularly involving virtual reality and AI. But I'm not going to touch on those today. Instead, I'm just going to talk a little bit about who David Chalmers is and some of the beliefs he has and why it all ties into this consciousness discussion. So, David Chalmers is an Australian philosopher and cognitive scientist. He is very well known in a lot of pseudoscience, as well as quantum science and physicist communities. I don't really go into the physicist communities, but to be honest, I do see his name mentioned a ton in spiritual and esoteric conversations a lot. Now, David Chalmers poses the question, so it's understood that people have mental states that allow them to say, identify that a peanut butter and jelly sandwich exists and that it's there. They have a name for it. But why do we have the ability to sense the color of the sandwich? How come we can see the bread and we can see the brown peanut butter and the purple jelly? Or why do we have thoughts about the sandwich, about what it means to us? Maybe we think of Uncrustables or childhood. Why does this information processing about a peanut butter and jelly sandwich require a conscious experience? In a sense, it's food. We should just have this natural innate drive to eat food and have zero thoughts about it, but we usually do have thoughts about it. Thinking about a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, maybe you think about taking field trips at school, maybe you think about packing an Uncrustable to go to school. I know I keep bringing this back to school. Maybe you think about making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich with your grandma. I don't know, but the point is that this is something that doesn't necessarily seem to require a conscious agent, and yet we have conscious thoughts and feelings and sensations about this peanut butter and jelly sandwich, which isn't really necessary for evolution and our current laws of understanding when it comes to physicalism. Chalmers argues that consciousness is fundamental and that it may not be observable in a physical sense. At least I think this is what he's trying to say. There are a lot of big words that I don't completely understand regarding his particular idea of why consciousness exists and what its purpose is. But what I've gathered is that I think what his point is that consciousness seems like something that's not really required to exist necessarily, and yet we are conscious beings. And he also seems to question, where is this consciousness? And it doesn't seem to exist in a way that we can physically define. We can't point where consciousness is. We don't really know, and we also don't know why we have it. And so he explores a lot of these concepts. The next person I want to talk about is Federico Faggin. He is an Italian physicist who invented the microprocessor, which is crazy. The microprocessor is essentially what's making my computer run right now. It's my CPU. But I also have a microprocessor in my cell phone, as do you, or whatever you're watching this on probably has a microprocessor. To be fair, I don't know enough about technology, but the microprocessor is a really big deal, and I can say that after building my PC twice, you don't want that CPU to get fried. That is the most fragile thing, and it's the brain of my entire computer. Now, like Chalmers, Federico Faggin wanted to know, why do electric signals in the brain produce thoughts and feelings? And how could he invent a computer that could do the same? So essentially like an artificial intelligence that could produce thoughts and feelings of its own. This desire from him led him to end up exploring consciousness, because if he's trying to make an AI, it would have to have its own consciousness. And if consciousness is only electrical signals in the brain, surely you can create that on a computer. Wrong. So he found out that one of the big drivers of consciousness is free will. We have free will to make choices and decisions, and computers don't do that. You can program them to make decisions or do things randomly, but they're not really making a conscious decision. If you tell a computer to make a choice, it can't really do that, not on its own. You'd have to program something in it, and the programming in and of itself takes away the free will. So computers cannot be conscious. Faggin also asks, why do we even have experience at all, and where is thought localized? Again, this seems to be a very common question in philosophy and in physics, apparently. But his answer is that experiences are quantum phenomena and they exist in this quantum realm. So Faggin is trying to marry science and spiritualism, put them together, and essentially theorize that our consciousness is non-local, but it's fundamental to reality, and that it's a quantum phenomena. And it exists in this quantum realm, which is very hard to define, and a lot of physicists disagree on this, and some physicists argue that this enters pseudoscience, so take that with a grain of salt. But I do think it's very interesting, and I've loved listening to Federico Faggin's interviews. I have found so many on YouTube. They're amazing. Highly recommend listening. I just find him very, very fascinating personally. Okay, so next up we have Donald Hoffman, and he is an American cognitive psychologist. Now, I also really enjoy listening to Donald Hoffman, but I think what's really helpful is he puts a lot of his teachings and his theories into layman's terms, which makes it very easy for people like me, honestly, and maybe people like you. I don't know who you are, but I assume that having things spoken about in layman's terms is very helpful, especially if you want to enter these spaces and start to understand the philosophy and the quantum physics and whatever behind all of these ideas about consciousness. And his sort of analogies are super helpful for understanding exactly what a lot of big thinkers are talking about when they discuss consciousness and the role of consciousness on our reality. Again, the whole point of consciousness is kind of like asking, who is God? What is God? And it can become a very spiritual thing. I think that if this God is all-knowing, all-experiencing, all-encompassing, and God is simply pure consciousness, this completely changes the way that we can look at every religion. And it also changes the way we can look at a lot of religious philosophy. And by the end of this video, I am going to tie in some biblical scripture, because I am rereading the Bible right now, and I will probably make a video on that. But I am rereading it with a more esoteric and, I guess, I don't want to say enlightened, but I think that'll get the message across that I've changed, and I'm looking at this text in a different way now. But I don't really consider myself enlightened by any means. I am maybe more aware, but simply for the sake of conveying the idea, I am reading the Bible with a new lens, and I will be tying some scripture in at the end here. Anyway, back to Donald Hoffman. So he has this interface theory of perception, which basically says that objects that we perceive in reality are akin to icons on a desktop that give us a mental idea of what those objects are and how they function, but does not truly reflect the nature of the object. So for example, an icon isn't really like this picture of Steam. This is my gaming headset, guys. I like to game, but the icon that I have for Steam, it's not really the icon. The icon is a visual depiction of a bunch of computer code, and the code is what takes me to Steam and allows me to play games. But the idea of the interface theory of perception is that in reality, the cute little Palm Pal I have here, that's an acorn, isn't really an acorn and isn't really a Palm Pal. It's just a perception that I have to give this meaning and to allow me to interact with it. But it's not really this, and it doesn't really exist in this way. So if we translate this to consciousness, it's that, again, you're kind of living in a dream in a sense, and nothing that you touch or see or experience is quite real per se. It is real, but it's your perception of that thing. And so it's again a dream. The dream itself isn't real, but you're perceiving it to be real. I hope that makes sense. But I really liked that analogy that he had about the reality being similar to, or objects in reality being similar to icons on a desktop. I love that metaphor. He also has a metaphor about virtual reality goggles. I think that one's super cool. Again, look him up. He has a bunch of interviews. He's pretty cool. He also says that reality is made of conscious agents, and objects don't exist independently of our perception of them. Again, back to my little Palm Pal here. he doesn't exist independently of my perception of him. Now, this can be a little confusing, and to be honest, I'm kind of grappling with this as well a little bit. If things don't really exist without, or they don't exist without my observation of them or my perception of them, then do you exist? Do other people exist? Or am I just perceiving that other people exist and I'm the only one here? I don't know how to grapple with that, because I personally think that we are all leaves on the tree of consciousness, and so we are all little individual slivers localized in a human form to experience this reality, and I'm not sure how to explain that objects don't exist independently of our perception, unless it's like objects like my rock that I don't think is conscious. I mean, it could be, but I don't think it is, so who knows? He also has this idea of non-physicalist monism, and this posits that consciousness is the root of reality, and physical reality emerges from consciousness. So again, we're back to that idea that consciousness came first, and it created emanations that eventually lead to reality, that reality at its root is just consciousness. Okay, now the last one I want to talk about is Rupert Spira, and I really hope I'm saying that name right. It could be Spira, but Rupert. Good old Rupert. He is an English philosopher with a lot of writings on happiness and consciousness. I think what's interesting about him is he has a very calm, optimistic way of speaking that I really enjoy. And he does talk a lot about inner happiness and coming back to happiness. His idea of enlightenment, for example, is this idea that it's a coming back to awareness of self and remembering that you are pure consciousness, that you are a part of it, you are a part of the whole, and that this idea of consciousness is peaceful, it's content, and because of that is happy. There is no room for negativity, really. And so he encourages people to come back to their infinite self, and to basically remember that they are pure consciousness and that's where they come from, and to find peace and happiness from there. Now, he says that reality and pretty much everything is pure consciousness, and this consciousness wished to experience itself. It wanted to say, I am, because its single infinite self cannot be anything without, separating itself. And so this kind of comes back to what I had said earlier in the video about this about this word I am. You cannot be anything until you have a perception of being. And so he kind of talks about that idea with this idea of awareness, and that consciousness must become aware before it can start creating emanations. He also says that consciousness is localized in the finite mind, which is us. So we each have a finite mind where consciousness is limited and localized. Consciousness, in a sense, you can think of it like I'm in this room, and this room is my localized consciousness, and I perceive everything in this room, but I'm not entirely aware that there is more outside of this room. There's a whole world out there, and that would be infinite consciousness. But in truth, it's not really out there and in here. They're the same. It's just depending on your awareness. He also has this quote here, which I think really sums up his philosophy, and it's from his website. I will add the link down below. And he says, non-duality is the recognition that underlying the multiplicity and diversity of experience, there is a single, infinite, and indivisible reality, whose nature is pure consciousness, from which all objects and selves derive their apparently independent existence. I love that. And I honestly think that sums up everything that I'm trying to say in this whole video. I should have just read that. I should have read that, posted the video, and been done with it. But no, I think it's important to have a longer conversation. Okay, so moving away from those philosophers for a second, I think you can kind of grasp the goal I had with bringing them up, which is to express consciousness and the role it has on reality, and why consciousness is fundamental, why it is the most important thing, and why we should start looking at reality through the lens of consciousness first. I'm conscious, yes. You're conscious, yes. But our consciousness is connected to this all that is, this universal oneness, this universal consciousness that has created reality. And reality is sort of like a dream. And I really, really, really want to iterate that. Now, some people are going to say, okay, is it like the Matrix then, where we're all in these little pods and we're dreaming of this reality because our consciousness has been uploaded to this system? It's something like that, yeah. Maybe less dark and sad than the Matrix, but I think that the concept is is similar enough. Yeah, something like that, but a little less dark. And we're not really like forced to be here. Okay, so moving away from that, let's talk about what is the holographic universe theory. Now, I wanted to bring up the holographic universe theory because it was one of the first things I came across as I started to dive into the role of consciousness on reality and started to really fact check the channeled messages that were coming in. I had all these messages about the universe not really being real in the way that we think, and that there is more than the physical universe, and that this universe is created by us and it's a manifestation of our thought. And I was like, that seems kind of ridiculous and out there. And so as I started doing research, I found this concept of the holographic universe theory. Now, the holographic universe theory, I'm still trying to wrap my head around. What I've gathered is that physicists and quantum physicists in particular, they are using this theory sort of as a analogy or a metaphor for what life is, and that the world is not really a hologram, but it's like a hologram. And they're trying to discuss what this 3D model is and what the 2D picture is that is being reflected essentially into the 3D model. So what is a hologram? Well, a hologram, you can think of it as when light refracts on a 2D picture and then creates a 3D model of that picture. That's essentially what a hologram is. And so in a sense, if reality were a hologram, what this would mean is that there's this 2D picture, we can just say consciousness because it's probably something big that's hard to wrap our heads around, that for whatever reason creates a 3D model, which is reality. Now, there's so much more to it, and to be honest, I don't fully understand it, but it is something that I'm trying to learn about. I'm currently reading Michael Talbot's book, The Holographic Universe. I'll put a picture of it up on the screen. And I am interested in following Billy Carson, who talks about the fractal holographic universe, and he has a book of it as well. He posits that the world we perceive is a light matrix. So I'm trying to look into that stuff, and I will probably make a better in-depth video of it at some point. I do know that a lot of people call these guys like pseudoscientists or like woo-woo conspiracy theorists or whatever, but I don't care. I think it's weird to block out other opinions just because you don't like them or they go against your own opinion. And I think as somebody who is trying to learn and has no clue what they're doing, I'm going to explore every possible avenue that I can. And I'm sorry, mainstream physics, but you're not really explaining reality in a way that makes sense. Or at least you're saying that everything is very physical and scientific. And can you tell me where consciousness is? No, that's kind of your problem. Okay, but moving away from that, yeah, the holographic universe theory is something to look into if you're interested, but it does kind of align with this idea of a role of consciousness on reality, because what is projecting our reality? Well, consciousness itself is. And so my theory is that consciousness is that image that creates this three-dimensional model, which is what we perceive as physical reality. But again, it's not really real. Kind of. I mean, it's real and it's not. I'm lacking the language for this. Now, I want to circle back for just a second. I don't know why I put it this late in the video, but I have this note about the observer effect, and this ties back to what Donald Hoffman said about reality being made of conscious agents and that objects don't exist independently of our perception of them. The observer effect essentially is when we observe an object, it appears before us like a particle, but when we're not looking, it exists as a wave of potential. This, I believe, was explained, I want to say the double slit experiment, but I could be wrong. I will put a note on the screen which study or which experiment, I guess, led to this conclusion. But essentially, the simple act of observing affects the subject, and if that's true, that means that our thoughts shape reality. Our thoughts impact reality in some way. There are definitely stories out there about random number generators being affected by consciousness, by people just thinking about them. So if everything exists as a wave of potential until we perceive it, then again, that kind of sort of backs up this idea that reality is sort of like a dream, that it is something we create. It is not the end-all be-all, and that consciousness must exist non-locally, and that it must be the driving force or the root of everything. So if observation impacts or affects a subject, with this observer effect, essentially, then that changes a lot of things. So what does all of this have to do with you? What does it mean for you? I wanted to leave off with this because I think that it's really important, and I didn't make this video just to ramble about consciousness. I do have a point. There is a purpose to it all. So what does this mean? What is the point of knowing that consciousness is fundamental and that it is what creates emanations and manifests reality? What is the point of knowing this? Well, the point is that you form your own reality. That is point number one. You form your own reality, which means that your thoughts quite literally shape your reality. Now, are there outside influences? Yes, and I would say other people's thoughts also shape reality, so keep that in mind. But if your thoughts shape your reality, then you are only limited by what you tell yourself you're limited by. It's why people believe in manifestation and believe it works. You limit yourself. You hold yourself back. And it means that you can change the way you think and change your thoughts and change your perceptions of things, which will fundamentally change your reality. I also think that it's important to know that we all formed a shared reality. Like this world, everything in it, everything that we made made it for ourselves. We did it for ourselves. Or at least if we are, in a sense, a part of the whole, we are an emanation or a limited version of pure consciousness. Pure consciousness created everything. And so you can think of it, again, as coming from this sort of godlike figure, though it's intangible and it's more of a concept and less of a person. But you emanated from this pure consciousness or this universal consciousness, and then together we form our reality. And I think that's a really important lesson to walk away with, because again, it means we can shape our reality, and perhaps more literally than we think. Now, I had a Bible verse that I'm going to have to pull up on my Bible app because the thing did not save on my outline. But aside from just changing your perspective on reality and manifesting, say, wealth or abundance, or manifesting friends or a new job, instead of just those sorts of things, or manifesting happiness for yourself, maybe we can quite literally shape reality. Now, I know this is going to be a very out there conversation, a very out there topic, and not everybody's going to agree with it, and that's okay. I'm not here to limit myself and decide that because something seems absolutely crazy that it can't be possible, so I'm going to say it anyway. It's also something that has been a channeled message that has come through, that we can shape our reality quite literally, like physically shape it with our thoughts. But I want to talk about a lesson that we can take from Jesus, or Yeshua, from Matthew 21:21-22. And I'm going to read the King James version. I don't really like the King James version of the Bible, but it is one of the most well-known, so I'm going to use it to basically read to you this Bible verse and then explain it to give you a little bit of background. Essentially what happens is Jesus gets hungry, he sees this fig tree, he goes up, fig tree has no figs, and he is not happy about that, so he curses the fig tree and it withers before him. And then essentially his disciples are like, Jesus, how did you do that? And this is his response. And I think this response is insanely important, and it aligns perfectly with this idea of manifestation and this idea that you shape reality. So, Jesus answered and said unto them, Verily I say unto you, if ye have faith and doubt not, ye shall not only do this which is done to the fig tree, but also, if ye shall say unto this mountain, Be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea, it shall be done. And all things whatsoever ye shall ask in prayer, believing, ye shall receive. So it's essentially saying that you could make the fig tree wither. You could move mountains if you believe and do not have doubt. Whatever you ask for, you receive. That is a huge, huge lesson in manifestation, but I think it also comes down to this idea that you quite literally can shape physical reality. You just have to believe it. And we are all raised to believe that this physical reality is physical and that there is nothing more to it. And the laws are the laws. The laws of physics exist, and we cannot we cannot break them. And what if we could? What if all of this is actually just thought? And what if all of this is just conscious experience, like a conscious dream? What if we quite literally could shape our reality with just our minds? But you have to believe it in order for it to happen. You cannot have a single shred of doubt. I don't know, just something to walk away with. That's something I want to leave you with, just a concept. But it definitely, if that is a really ancient idea, at least from Jesus' time, and it's not just Jesus that believes stuff like this. You can look at many other religions that point to the same idea of having faith, having belief, and being able to change your reality. It definitely makes me wonder, and I am still on a journey to figure out if I firmly believe this, but maybe that's my problem. There's doubt, so I cannot move mountains yet, but maybe I will one day, who knows. But it does make us kind of question reality and question consciousness and question our ability to manifest and what our thoughts can do on our lives and in our world. So anyway, I wanted to leave you guys with that, and I also want to know, what are your guys' thoughts about consciousness and its role in reality? What do you think about physical reality versus the quantum realm and what's out there? And what is your opinion on this universal consciousness that permeates all of us in a sense? You're a part of the whole, and the whole is within you in a sense. So anyway, that is all I have for today. If you guys are interested, please leave comments down below, ask me questions. I love to have a chat, and let me know if you want me to deep dive into any of these particular topics. I do think I will at some point. They are just a beast to film and edit and all of that, but I will try to get around to it when I can. Anyway, thank you guys again for watching, and I will catch you next time.